is November 25th from 2016, and we're broadcasting live from Washington, D.C.
It is 10:45 p.m. and we have breaking news for you. Some may see him as a hero and some may see him as a dictator. But during the 1950s, he fought for Cuba's liberty, and after earning it, he took it away. The international figure that we are talking about is Fidel Castro. And we have been informed by current president and first secretary, Raul Castro, that he sadly passed away.
Raul Castro, who also happens to be Fidel's brother, made the announcement about his death on state television. He died of natural causes at 10:29 p.m. He was 90 years old.
Now, you might wonder, why is Castro famous? Well, we're gonna provide that information.
And now we're going with our fellow news reporter, Santiago Dominguez,
who happens to be in La Habana, Cuba.
He's mourning the death of Cuban leader Castro with the rest of the Cuban population.
Hello, Santi. How are you doing today?
Oh, hi girls, how are you? Well, I am in Cuba right now, where people is very sad about the news you've just heard. Fidel Castro, the dictator, has just passed away a few hours ago, and people is very sad, as we can see. Fidel was a political leader. He was the main character of the Cuban Revolution, and he defeated Batista along with his friends, Che Guevara, and his brother, Raul Castro. He was a very important character because he was the leader, and after Batista was defeated, he became the one in charge in Cuba. Well, we're very sad, and we're here breaking the law.
Well, as Santiago said, Fidel Castro first appeared to the public eye in 1953, when Cuba started its revolution against Fulgencio Batista's dictatorship, which lasted from 1952 to 1959. After a year of living under Fulgencio's dictatorship, a group of 138 revolutionaries led by Fidel Castro attacked at dawn at the Moncada barracks. This event is known as the beginning of the Cuban Revolution. This small crowd was easily defeated, and Castro escaped with his brother Raul Castro, but they were captured later. Fidel was sentenced to 15 years in prison, but he only served 2. After being released, he was exiled to many other Cuban revolutionaries to Mexico, where they planned their turn along Argentinian Dr. Che Guevara. These Cuban exiles managed to return to their country by purchasing a Mexican yacht called Grandma. And after gathering with more and more people who wanted a change regarding the Cuban leader, Batista was taken down on January 1st, 1959, and exiled from the island. During this period, Castro quote, "History will absolve me," and became a recognized figure and a hero to many poor Cubans, encouraging them to join the rebel army. Another cause was the large role of the United States played in Cuba's ruling, since the island was U.S. property and the American country defeated Spain and became one of the possessions. After Castro's victory in 1959, he took the lead of the country, but the next years weren't easy for Cuba. Santiago, please.
Since the revolution ended, long-term complications with the United States came in. Nowadays, they still exist. In 1960, the U.S. set up an embargo against Cuba, which consists of economic sanctions against Cuba and restrictions on Cuban travel and commerce for all people and companies under U.S. jurisdiction. The embargo, known among us Cubans as el bloqueo, in English blockade, has been going for 55 years, and even though some of its restrictions have been repealed during Obama's administration, it hasn't been completely lifted because Cuba hasn't met the required conditions. Another consequence of this event was the Bay of Pigs invasion, where trained Cuban exiles were sent by the United States to Cuba in a failed attempt to overthrow Fidel Castro's government to prevent communism from taking hold in the Americas. Che Guevara was also assassinated after the revolution, and the most important event that occurred in Cuba after the revolution was the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cuban Missile Crisis was the closest the world ever came to a nuclear war. It was caused by the Cuban Revolution and the way Castro ruled Cuba after taking the lead. There was also tension between the superpowers, since the US and the USSR were dealing with the space race, the nuclear arms race, and the testing of nukes, and the founding of anti-communist countries by the US. Lastly, the Bay of Pigs invasion was the straw that broke the camel's back and made the USSR support Castro by putting missiles in Cuba in order to protect the island and itself, since the US had missiles in Turkey and Italy, two of the USSR allies. Both the US and the USSR had enough nuclear weapons to destroy the Earth 4 times.
This event started on October 16th from 1962 and ended on the 28th, and they're considered the 12 most intense days of the Cold War, since the doomsday clock stood at 1 minute to midnight, being the closest number of minutes to man-made global catastrophe in history. On October 27th, an American spy plane was shot down by a Soviet missile, and on the same day, a nuclear-armed Soviet submarine was hit by a small depth charge from a U.S. Navy vessel trying to signal it up to come up. The sub was too deep to communicate to the surface, so the commanders inside thought war had begun and prepared to launch a nuclear torpedo. That decision had to be made unanimously by 3 officers, but only the captain and political officer authorized the launch, while Vasily Arkhipov, second in command, refused. His decision saved the day, and perhaps the world. John F. Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev were the presidents of the US and the USSR at the time, and they came with a diplomatic solution to avoid war after Khrushchev wrote a personal letter to Kennedy asking for a meeting. Both countries came with the following proposal. The US will remove their missiles from Italy and Turkey and promise to never invade Cuba in exchange for the Soviet withdrawal from Cuba under UN inspection. After 6 years of the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was signed, meaning the superpowers promised not to supply nuclear technology to other countries. After these 12 crazy days, the consequences were that the US and the USSR tried to beat each other to see who made it first to the space, and also caused the 2 countries to try to become the first country with nuclear weapons or power. As we already said, the US stopped all trades between them and Cuba, and right after the embargo was established, Castro made a trade agreement with the USSR. The CIA embarrassed Kennedy greatly with their failed attempt to attack Cuba, and Castro asked Russia for weapons to defend Cuba from the US.
Oh, thank you, chicas. I'll be here until tomorrow in La Habana, whatever you need, and well, thank you. I hope to see you next week. Fidel.
Well, thanks for watching. That's all for today. This is SKM News, and we're sad about the death of Santi and Fidel.
Rest in peace, both of you. See you next week.